Mafia boss gave a homeless woman his black card on Christmas Eve and walked away. Less than an hour later, a transaction alert lit up his phone. It wasn't designer clothes. It wasn't a luxury hotel. It wasn't even a warm meal for herself. It was something he couldn't ignore. Instantly, he knew there would be consequences because in that frozen moment, she made a choice that would shatter everything he believed about human nature and expose a truth about himself he'd spent 38 years running from. Luca Romano had stopped believing in human goodness the day he watched his father put a bullet in a man who'd shown mercy to an enemy. He was 12 years old, standing in the back room of the family's restaurant, learning that in their world, compassion wasn't just weakness. It was a death sentence waiting to happen. At 38, he controlled Chicago's South Side with the kind of iron grip that made grown men cross the street when they saw his black SUV coming. His empire stretched through construction companies, waste management, import-export businesses, all legitimate on paper, all serving purposes that would never see daylight in a courtroom. His penthouse suite overlooking Lake Michigan had floor-to-ceiling windows that stretched 20 feet high, Italian marble imported from Carrara, art worth millions hanging on walls that echoed with expensive silence. He owned properties in 3 states, a yacht docked in Miami, cars that cost more than most people's houses. His watch alone could feed a family for a year. Yet every morning, Luca Romano woke up feeling like a man who'd traded his soul for an empire and couldn't remember why he'd thought it was worth the price. His late father, Giovanni Romano, had drilled one commandment into him since that day in the restaurant's back room. In our world, compassion gets you killed, son. The desperate are the most dangerous. They'll smile while planting a knife in your back. Trust no one. Give nothing without taking more in return. Show weakness once, and wolves will tear you apart before sunrise. Giovanni had lived by that gospel for 63 years, died of a heart attack in his own bed surrounded by soldiers who feared him, and left behind a son who'd never once questioned whether the old man had been right or just too broken to believe anything else. Luca had carried that philosophy like armor for 26 years. Every decision filtered through cold calculation. Every relationship transactional. Every act of generosity, the rare times it happened, carefully orchestrated for strategic advantage. Protection money came with actual protection, but at prices that kept businesses barely breathing. He'd never once looked poverty in the face and simply helped. Not without leverage, not without control, not without making sure he came out ahead. That's how you survived in his world. That's how you built something that lasted. But that Christmas Eve, something cracked in the ice around his chest, and Luca couldn't explain why. He was leaving Rizzo's import warehouse on the south side, his last piece of business before the mandatory Christmas celebrations. The meeting had been brief and brutal, a warehouse manager skimming profits, thinking Luca wouldn't notice 5,000 here, 8,000 there. The man had begged, pleaded, swore on his children's lives it wouldn't happen again. Luca had listened with the patience of a confessor, then nodded to Marco, his enforcer. The man wouldn't see New Year's. That was the cost of betrayal. That was the price of thinking Luca Romano was soft enough to forgive theft. Blood was the price of respect in his world, and Luca had paid it without hesitation for 2 decades. His phone buzzed as Marco opened the SUV door. Text from his underboss. Midnight mass at St. Anthony's. Whole crew expected. Don't be late, boss. The family's Christmas Eve tradition. Pack the church. Make a show of devotion. Let the neighborhood see that the Romano family honored God and tradition. Never mind that most of them would have fresh sins to confess if they actually believed. It was theater. Everything was theater. The all-night grocery store sat on the corner of Halsted and 31st, fluorescent lights harsh against the December darkness. Luca had driven past it 1,000 times, barely registered its existence. Just another struggling business in a struggling neighborhood, probably paying his crew protection money just to keep the doors open. But that night, as Marco pulled into the parking lot, taking a shortcut to the church, Luca saw her. She was huddled near the entrance, just outside the harsh spill of light, as if she didn't want to be too visible but needed to be close enough to hope. A black woman, early 30s maybe, with exhaustion carved into every line of her face in a way that spoke of months, not days. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had given up on neatness somewhere around October. She wore a donated coat. You could tell by the way it didn't fit. Too large in the shoulders, too short in the sleeves. Over clothes that had been washed in gas station bathrooms and dried on her body. But it was the child that made Luca's chest tighten in a way he didn't recognize. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, slept curled against her mother's side, wrapped in blankets that were decorative throws from someone's couch, not meant for Chicago winter. The child's face was peaceful in sleep, one small hand clutching a worn teddy bear that looked like it had survived a war. The woman's arms were locked around her daughter like a fortress made of flesh and bone and desperate, ferocious love. A piece of cardboard rested against a shopping cart that held everything they owned. 2 garbage bags, a backpack with a broken zipper, a child's pink suitcase with a missing wheel, black marker, shaky letters, words that hit harder than they should have. Single mother. Lost everything. Anything helps. Merry Christmas. Luca stared at the sign, at the sleeping child, at the woman's hands. Rough from cold, nails clean but ragged. Someone who'd given up on vanity but not on dignity. Marco cleared his throat. Boss, we're gonna be late for Mass. Father Benedict gets pissy when we walk in after it starts. Luca didn't move. His hand was on the door handle, but something held him frozen. Homeless people were everywhere in Chicago. This wasn't special. This wasn't different. This was just another casualty of a system he'd helped create, where the strong took and the weak suffered and nobody questioned whether that was just how things worked. He'd walked past 100 scenes like this. He'd probably driven past this exact woman before without a second glance. But something about her stopped him cold. Maybe it was Christmas Eve. Maybe it was the child's peaceful face, so trusting that her mother would keep her safe even when they had nothing. Maybe it was the way the woman wasn't performing desperation. No aggressive eye contact, no rehearsed story ready to deploy, just quiet exhaustion and a cardboard sign that apologized for existing. Wait here, Luca said, his voice distant, disconnected from the urgency of midnight mass and crew expectations and all the things that usually mattered. Marco's eyes widened. Boss, seriously? We don't have time for... I said wait here. Luca's tone left no room for argument. He stepped out of the SUV, expensive leather shoes clicking against pavement still wet from earlier snow, unsure why his body was moving when every logical part of his brain was screaming to stay in the warm car and let Marco drive away. The woman looked up as he approached, and Luca saw it immediately, intelligence living behind that exhaustion. Education in the careful way she straightened her spine. This wasn't someone born into poverty. This was someone who'd fallen from somewhere higher and couldn't find footing on the way down. I'm sorry, she said immediately, voice rough from cold and disuse. We're not bothering anyone. We can move if we need to. She was already gathering the blankets, already preparing to relocate, already apologizing for the crime of being visible in her suffering. Her apology for existing hit Luca harder than any threat he'd received in 20 years of criminal enterprise. What's your name? He asked, stopping a few feet away, careful not to startle her. Desperate people could be dangerous. His father's voice, always his father's voice, but this woman didn't look dangerous. She looked like someone who'd used every ounce of strength just to make it through today, and wasn't sure she had enough left for tomorrow. She blinked, surprised that someone in a suit that expensive would speak to her like a human being. Naomi, she said quietly. Naomi Carter. And your daughter? The woman's arms instinctively tightened around the sleeping child. Protective. Primal. The same way lionesses guarded cubs. Her name is Maya. She just turned 7 last month. Luca studied Naomi's face, the careful way she held herself despite the circumstances. How long have you been out here? Shame flickered across her features like a match struck in darkness. 6 months. We were staying with my sister until June, but she lost her place too. We've been rotating between here and the shelter on Roosevelt when they have space, which isn't often. 6 months. A 7-year-old child sleeping on frozen pavement for 6 months while thousands of people walked past every single day. While Luca spent more on a single dinner than this woman probably saw in a month. while he ordered hits on men who stole pocket change and slept soundly afterward. Marco appeared at Luca's shoulder. "Boss, seriously, we need to." Luca raised one hand, silencing him without breaking eye contact with Naomi. His father's voice echoed in his skull, loud and insistent. "The desperate will bleed you dry and thank you while doing it. This is a con. She probably has a crew watching, waiting for you to pull out cash so they can rob you. You're being played, son. Don't be a fool." But another voice, quieter, pushed back. "What if she's not? What if she's exactly what she appears to be? A woman who got unlucky and couldn't climb back out? What if your father was wrong about everything?" Maybe it was time to test that theory himself. To prove once and for all whether Giovanni Romano had been a wise man protecting his son from harsh truths, or just a broken man who'd chosen fear over faith and called it wisdom. Luca reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Naomi's eyes widened slightly, probably expecting a few bills if she was lucky. Maybe a 20, maybe 50 if Christmas spirit moved the stranger in the expensive suit. She'd probably rehearsed her thank you, prepared her blessing, ready to make this man feel good about his charity so he'd walk away satisfied. Instead, Luca pulled out a matte black credit card with platinum edges and raised numbers. No name visible, no bank logo, just a card that screamed money and power and access to things most people couldn't comprehend. Naomi stared at it like he'd pulled out a weapon. "Take it," Luca said, holding the card between them like a bridge between two completely different worlds that should never intersect. "I don't understand," Naomi stammered, pulling Maya closer as if the card itself might hurt them. "Sir, I can't. It's yours for 24 hours, Luca explained, his voice steady despite the chaos of doubt screaming inside his head. "Buy whatever you want. No limits, no questions, no conditions." Naomi's hands began to tremble. "Sir, this has to be some kind of trick. People like you don't hand out credit cards to people like me. This doesn't happen. This isn't." "I want to see something," Luca interrupted, and for the first time in years he spoke complete truth to a stranger. "I want to see what someone with nothing does when given everything. I want to test something my father taught me." He pressed the card into her palm. Her finger. Midnight came and went. Church bells rang across the city. 1 a.m., 2, 3, still nothing. Why wasn't she spending? Was she afraid? Did she think it was a trap, that police were waiting to arrest her for credit card fraud the moment she used it? Or was she planning something bigger? Waiting for stores to open, making lists, preparing to drain the account systematically like someone who understood exactly what she'd been given? Luca poured bourbon he didn't drink, stared at his phone like it held answers to questions he'd never asked before. Marco texted, "You good, boss? Weird night." Luca didn't respond. His underboss called, probably checking if he'd lost his mind. Luca let it go to voicemail. At 4:47 a.m., Christmas morning, his phone buzzed. Transaction, $43.29. Location, Walmart, South Side. Luca's pulse spiked. He clicked for details, but the app only showed the amount and location, not what was purchased. Just numbers representing choices he couldn't see. Then another notification. Transaction, $31.84. Location, CVS Pharmacy, Bridgeport. Then another, $18.67. McDonald's. His chest tightened. Not with anger, he'd expected her to spend, that was the point. But with something stranger. Anticipation. Maybe hope, though he'd never admit that word applied to him anymore. She was spending, yes, but carefully. Modestly. These weren't the transactions of someone drunk on sudden wealth. Someone maxing out cards at luxury stores. These were the purchases of someone desperately practical. Someone who'd learned to survive on nothing and couldn't quite believe in abundance even when it was literally in her hand. By 8 a.m., Luca couldn't wait anymore. He hadn't slept, hadn't changed clothes. He called Marco, who answered sounding exhausted from Christmas morning with his own family. "Cancel everything today," Luca said before Marco could speak. "Boss, it's Christmas. We don't have anything scheduled except, I need you to drive me. Now." 30 minutes later, They were heading south, back toward that grocery store. Luca's phone showed 4 transactions total, none over $50. Less than $150 spent in more than 12 hours of having unlimited access to wealth. Either she was the most cautious person alive, or she was planning something Luca couldn't predict, or she was exactly what she appeared to be. When they reached the grocery store, Naomi was exactly where he'd left her. But everything else had changed in ways that made Luca's throat tight. Maya was awake now, sitting beside her mother, and the transformation was startling. The child wore a brand new purple winter coat with a fur-lined hood, actually fitted to her small frame. Her hair had been washed and brushed, pulled back with small butterfly clips that caught the morning light. She wore new boots, waterproof, the kind meant for actual winter, and clutched a new doll, hugging it like treasure while she colored in a fresh coloring book with crayons that still smelled like the package. Naomi saw Luca approaching and immediately stood, the black card already in her trembling hand. "I was going to return it," she said quickly, panic edging her voice. "I promise I was. I just needed to get a few things first. Basic things. Necessary things. I didn't." "Keep it," Luca said gently, raising both hands in a gesture of peace he rarely made. "You still have hours left." Naomi's shoulders sagged with something between relief and confusion. "I don't understand you. I don't understand any of this." "That makes 2 of us," Luca admitted, and it was the truth. He glanced at Maya, who was watching him with wide, curious brown eyes that held no fear, only the natural wariness of a child who'd learned the world could be cruel. "You bought her a coat. She was freezing," Naomi said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. Perhaps that was the only explanation that had ever mattered. Luca knelt down to Maya's level, careful not to startle her, aware that Marco was watching this interaction like his boss had been replaced by an alien. "That's a nice doll. What's her name?" Maya hugged the toy tighter, shy but smiling. "Grace," she whispered. "Because Mama says grace is what keeps us going." Something cracked in Luca's chest. Actually cracked, like ice breaking. "That's a beautiful name," he said softly, his throat tight for reasons he couldn't explain and didn't want to examine. He looked up at Naomi. "What else did you buy?" Naomi hesitated, then slowly pulled crumpled receipts from her coat pocket and handed them over like evidence in a trial she was certain to lose. Luca scanned the first receipt from Walmart, and with each line item, something in his worldview began to fracture. Children's winter coat, size 7. Children's boots, waterproof. Thermal socks, 3-pack. Children's underwear, pack of 7. Children's thermal underwear set. Stuffed doll. Coloring books, 2. Crayons, 24-pack. His throat tightened. Every single item was for Maya. Not one thing for herself. The second receipt from CVS made it worse. Children's multivitamins. Children's pain reliever. Band-Aids. Neosporin. Children's cold medicine. Children's shampoo and conditioner. The third receipt from McDonald's. 2 Happy Meals. Apple slices. Milk. Luca's hands trembled. Hands that had held guns steady. Hands that had broken bones without shaking. Hands that had signed orders for men to die without a tremor. Those hands shook holding thermal paper that documented a mother's love in transaction codes. "You didn't buy anything for yourself," he said, his voice barely functional. "Not a single thing." Naomi shook her head. "Maya comes first. She always comes first. I can manage. I've managed this long. But she deserves." Her voice cracked. "She deserves to be warm, to be safe, to be a child, not whatever this has turned her into." But there was one more receipt. Luca almost missed it, smaller, printed on different paper. From a location that made his vision blur. St. Vincent's Church Shelter donation. $150. He looked up sharply, unable to process what he was seeing. "You donated money?" Naomi's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, like she'd been caught doing something shameful. "The shelter on Roosevelt. They've tried to help us when they could. They're always full, always running out of supplies. They turned us away last week because they didn't have space, but the volunteers, they cried when they had to. I could see it broke their hearts. She wrapped her arms around herself, defensive. I thought if I had extra, even just for one day, maybe I could help them help someone else. Someone with babies or someone sick, or someone else. Luca repeated, his voice breaking on the words. Naomi, you're homeless. You've been sleeping on frozen pavement for 6 months with your daughter. And you gave money to help other people. There are women there with disabilities, Naomi said quietly, meeting his eyes with something that looked like defiance. Teenagers who aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. Mothers with newborns who can't survive outside. Some of them have it so much worse than we do. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I know what it's like to need help and have every door closed in your face. If I could give back even a little, even for one day, I had to. How could I not? Luca stared at the receipts. Every word his father had ever spoken went silent, obliterated by thermal paper and transaction records. This woman who had every reason to be selfish, who had every justification to think only of herself and her daughter, who could have bought designer clothes and jewelry and electronics and anything her heart desired. She'd spent a killer's money on children's winter coats, medicine, and charity. Not liquor, not drugs, not luxury, just survival, just kindness, just love. If this story is hitting you in the heart, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me what you would have bought in Naomi's position. Your support keeps these stories coming. Now let's continue. You didn't buy yourself a coat, Luca said, his voice strained, barely holding together. You're still wearing that donated one that doesn't fit. Naomi shrugged. It's good enough. Maya needed one more. You didn't buy yourself food. The Happy Meals had extra. I ate what she didn't finish. You didn't buy yourself anything. Luca's voice rose despite himself. Nothing. Not even. He gestured helplessly at her, at the worn clothes, at the visible exhaustion, at 6 months of suffering written on her body. She's all I have, Naomi whispered, fresh tears cutting tracks down her face. She's all that matters. Every choice I make, every decision, every breath I take, it's all for her. What kind of mother would I be if I put myself first when my baby needs everything? Luca looked at Maya, carefully coloring a picture of a Christmas tree with fierce concentration. Grace the doll tucked under her arm. A child who'd spent 7 years learning that the world was cold and unstable, but who still smiled, still colored, still hoped because her mother refused to let her lose that. For the first time in his violent life, Luca Romano felt genuinely small. Not in wealth, he could buy this whole block without checking his account. Not in power, he controlled territory that stretched across 3 states. But in character, in humanity, in basic human decency that couldn't be bought or intimidated or built through fear. This homeless single mother had more grace in her roughened fingertips than he'd cultivated in 38 years of taking what he wanted and calling it strength. Get in the car, he said suddenly, the words tumbling out before his brain could catch up. Both of you, right now. Naomi blinked, fear flickering in her eyes. What? Both of you, get in the car. Luca's voice was thick, unrecognizable to his own ears. Please, where are you taking us? Naomi asked, pulling Maya close, protective instinct overriding everything else. Somewhere warm, Luca said, his voice breaking slightly. Somewhere safe. Somewhere you can finally stop running. Tears spilled down Naomi's cheeks. She looked at her daughter, then at the man kneeling before them, and for the first time in 6 months of hell, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, not everyone in the world was cruel. Marco opened the SUV door without being asked. Luca helped Naomi gather their belongings. 2 garbage bags, a broken backpack, a child's pink suitcase that had seen better days. Everything they owned in the world fit in his vehicle's trunk with room to spare. Maya climbed into the back seat, clutching Grace, eyes wide with wonder at the leather seats and the warmth that poured from the vents. Mama, it's so warm, she whispered, like heat itself was a miracle. Luca took them to a safe house apartment in Pilsen, a place kept for witnesses who needed protection, people hiding from enemies, the rare civilian who got caught in crossfire and needed to disappear. He'd never used it for kindness before. never used his organization's resources to simply help someone who needed it. The apartment was modest by his standards: 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, bathroom with hot water that actually worked. But Naomi stood in the doorway frozen, unable to cross the threshold, like entering might break whatever spell was allowing this to happen. "It's okay," Luca said gently, aware that Marco was watching this transformation with something like shock. "This is yours for as long as you need it. No conditions, no expectations, just safety." Maya, unburdened by adult disbelief, ran inside immediately, her new boots squeaking on hardwood floors. She touched everything with wonder. The couch that didn't have springs poking through, the curtains that actually blocked wind, the kitchen counter that held a bowl of fruit Luca had ordered stocked that morning. "Mama, look," Maya called, pointing at the bathroom. "There's a bathtub, a real one, like in the pictures." Naomi finally stepped inside, moving like someone walking through a dream that might shatter. She set down her garbage bags, everything she owned, everything that remained of her previous life, and turned to Luca with tears streaming freely. "I don't understand," she whispered, voice fracturing. "What do you want from us? Men like you don't do things for free. What's the price?" Luca had been asked variations of that question 10,000 times in his criminal career. Everyone wanted to know his angle, his agenda, his hidden price. But standing there watching a mother see safety for the first time in months, he realized he didn't have an agenda. For once in his life, he just had a choice to make between the man his father built and the man he might still become. "You reminded me what money is actually for," he said quietly. "I'd forgotten. Or maybe I never knew." Naomi walked over to where Maya was exploring the bathroom, exclaiming over towels that were soft and a mirror that didn't have cracks. She knelt down and wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her like she'd been afraid to hold her too tightly before, as if hope itself might break. "You need to rest," Luca said, his voice thick with emotions he'd suppressed for decades. "Order whatever food you want. Take a real bath. Sleep in an actual bed. I'll come back tomorrow morning. We'll figure out the next steps then." "Next steps?" Naomi asked, confusion and fear mixing in her expression. "Housing, employment, school for Maya, healthcare, childcare, stability." Luca listed them like a business plan because that's what his brain did. It solved problems systematically. "None of this has to be temporary unless you want it to be." Naomi stared at him like he'd just spoken a language she'd forgotten existed. "You're serious. Completely. You're a stranger. We're nobody. We're just 2 people who got unlucky and couldn't climb back out." "You were nobody," Luca corrected gently, aware this was the most honest he'd been with anyone in years. "Now you're someone I care about. Now you matter. Now you have someone who won't let you fall again." Naomi opened her mouth to argue, to protest, to explain all the reasons this couldn't be real. But exhaustion won. 6 months of hypervigilance and fear and sleeping with one eye open came crashing down all at once. She sank onto the couch, her body folding like someone who'd been holding up the sky and could finally let it rest on something stronger. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words carried the weight of 6 months of suffering compressed into 2 syllables. Luca nodded, his throat too tight to speak. As he left, he heard Maya's delighted laughter echoing behind him, and he realized he was smiling. Not the calculated smile he used in business meetings, not the cold smile that preceded violence, but something genuine, something human, something his face had almost forgotten how to do. That night, Luca made phone calls, not to his underboss about territory disputes, not to his lawyer about legal problems, not to his accountant about money laundering. He called social workers, housing advocates, job placement specialists, education coordinators, people who actually helped instead of taking. He used his name not as a weapon to threaten, but as a key to open doors that had been slammed in Naomi's face for months. His reputation that usually inspired fear instead inspired cooperation. Organizations that couldn't find resources suddenly discovered available apartments. Job training programs that were full found openings. Schools that had waiting lists made space. By morning, he had options. Real, tangible, sustainable options. He returned to the safe house at 9 a.m. on December 26th, carrying coffee from a place Maya would love and a bag of fresh pastries that still steamed in the cold air. When Naomi opened the door, she looked transformed. Not in appearance, she still wore the same worn clothes, but in posture, in the way she stood straighter, in the way her eyes held something other than perpetual fear. Maya was drawing at the kitchen table, humming a song about angels. Grace sat proudly beside her, overseeing the artwork like a supervisor. "Morning," Luca said, handing Naomi the coffee. She took it with both hands, inhaling the steam like a memory she'd thought was lost forever. "Real coffee," she whispered. "From an actual coffee shop. I forgot what that was like." They sat together while Maya colored and Luca laid out the plan. He'd found a 2-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport, a safe neighborhood near good schools. Rent subsidized initially through one of his legitimate companies, with a pathway to full independence as Naomi got back on her feet. Job training programs matched to her skills. She'd been an administrative assistant before everything fell apart, before an abusive ex-boyfriend destroyed her credit and her stability in ways that left no physical scars but plenty of damage. Healthcare coverage through the family's construction company. Maya enrolled in 2nd grade at a public school with excellent ratings and before and aftercare programs. Naomi listened in stunned silence, tears running down her face, dripping into coffee that had grown cold while Luca talked. "This isn't charity," Luca clarified, echoing what he'd been telling himself all night. "It's an investment. You're intelligent, capable, resilient. You just need a foundation to rebuild from. A place to stand so you can start climbing again." "I don't know how to repay you," Naomi said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how I could ever." "You already did," Luca replied, pulling out his phone to show her the banking app, the transaction history that had changed everything. "You showed me that goodness still exists in people. That desperation doesn't automatically create monsters. That my father was wrong about everything that actually matters." Naomi shook her head, more tears falling. "I just bought what Maya needed. I just tried to help people who'd helped us. That's just basic." "Exactly," Luca interrupted. "You had unlimited wealth for 24 hours and you chose love over greed. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How many people would have drained that card buying things for themselves and walked away without looking back?" Naomi looked at her daughter, carefully coloring inside the lines of an angel's wings, her small tongue poking out in concentration. "She's all I have. She's all that matters. Everything I do, every choice I make, it's all for her. How could I do anything else?" "I know," Luca said softly. "I saw it in those receipts. I saw it in that donation to the shelter. You could have taken everything, but you gave anyway. That's not just good, Naomi. That's extraordinary." 3 weeks later, Naomi and Maya moved into their new apartment. 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor of a clean, quiet building with a small playground out back and neighbors who smiled when they passed in the hallways. It wasn't luxury, laminate counters, builder-grade carpet, fixtures from a catalog. But it was theirs. Walls that didn't move. A door that locked from the inside. Heat that worked. Windows that let in light without letting in wind. Luca helped them move in, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs, assembling furniture from IKEA, laughing when Maya insisted on supervising every step by placing Grace on each finished piece and declaring it perfect. "She's very particular about interior design," Naomi joked, watching her daughter arrange her new stuffed animals with the seriousness of an architect. Luca didn't mind. For the first time in years, he felt useful. Not powerful. Not influential. Not feared. Just useful. Just present. Just human. That evening, after Maya fell asleep in her new bed, her very first bed that wasn't a floor or a couch or someone else's temporary charity, Sutton and Luca stood in the small living room, exhaustion and gratitude hanging thick between them. "I start the job training program next Monday," Naomi said. "Administrative work, medical billing, stable hours, good benefits, a real career path. You're going to be incredible at it," Luca said, and he meant it. Naomi looked around the apartment, her eyes glistening in the lamplight. I keep waiting to wake up back at that grocery store, to realize this was all some elaborate dream I had while freezing on concrete. It's real, Luca assured her. It's yours. No one can take it away. She turned to face him, her voice breaking around the edges. Why did you choose us? Out of all the people you could have helped, out of everyone in the city who's struggling, why me and Maya? Luca had thought about that question every day since Christmas Eve. He'd analyzed it like a business decision, broken it down into logical components, tried to understand his own motivations with the same cold calculation he applied to everything else. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than logic. Because you looked at your daughter the way my mother used to look at me, he said quietly, the words coming from somewhere deep and long buried. Before she died when I was 10. Before my father turned cold and bitter and taught me that trust was weakness. You looked at Maya like nothing else in the world existed. Like you'd burn down the universe to keep her safe. And I realized I'd spent 28 years believing people like you didn't exist anymore. Naomi wiped her eyes. You gave us a future. You gave us hope. You saved our lives. No, Luca said firmly. You already had a future. I just helped you reach it. You did the hard part. You survived. You kept Maya safe. You stayed good when the world gave you every reason to be bitter. That's all you. I just removed some obstacles. Months passed. Naomi completed her training program with honors. Landed a position at a medical billing company with full benefits and regular hours. Maya thrived in second grade, making friends, bringing home artwork that covered the refrigerator, no longer carrying the weight of homelessness in her small shoulders. Luca visited often, not as a benefactor checking on an investment but as family. Someone who attended Maya's school concerts where she sang off-key but with complete confidence. Someone who helped Naomi navigate apartment maintenance when the furnace made strange noises. Someone who showed up on difficult days without being asked. He learned things about himself he'd never known. That he liked cooking simple pasta dinners more than expensive steakhouse meals. That children's laughter was better than the respect fear commanded. That watching someone rebuild their life was more satisfying than watching his empire expand. One evening in November, sitting on Naomi's modest couch while Maya showed him her science project about butterflies, Naomi handed him something that made his breath catch. The black card. The one he'd given her almost a year ago. I kept it, she admitted, blushing like she'd been caught stealing. I know I should have given it back months ago, but I was scared. Scared that if I returned it, all of this would disappear. That it was only real as long as I held onto that piece of plastic. Luca smiled, closing her fingers back around the card. Keep it. Luca, I can't. I have my own money now. I don't need. Emergency fund, he said simply. For Maya. For unexpected expenses. For peace of mind. You've proven exactly what you do with power. You've proven I can trust you more than I trust people I've known for decades. Naomi stared at the card, then at him, tears welling. You really mean that? Completely. She wiped her eyes, laughing through tears. You're the strangest mafia boss I've ever met. How many mafia bosses have you met? Just you, Naomi admitted. But I'm pretty sure you're the strange one. Good, Luca said. I'd hate to be predictable. The following Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after their first meeting, Luca stood at a podium in a restored community center in Pilsen. The room was packed with investors, journalists, community leaders, and families who'd heard whispers about what was being announced. My father taught me that compassion was weakness, Luca said, his voice carrying to the back of the room. He taught me that the desperate were dangerous, that trust was for fools, that helping others without benefit to yourself was suicide in our world. He paused, looking out at faces that knew exactly who he was and what he represented. A woman named Naomi Carter proved him wrong about everything. He announced Romano Family Services, comprehensive support for single parents facing homelessness and domestic violence, emergency housing, job training, childcare, healthcare, education support, no degrading applications, no bureaucratic nightmares, just help extended with dignity to people who'd been failed by every other system. And sitting in the front row, wearing a professional dress she'd bought with her own paycheck, holding Maya's hand, was Naomi Carter. No longer homeless, no longer desperate, no longer invisible. Just a mother who'd survived hell and found her footing on the other side, ready to help others do the same. Luca caught her eye during the speech and she smiled. The kind of smile that said everything words couldn't. Gratitude, pride, friendship, family. He thought about that Christmas Eve morning, about a black card extended like a test, about his father's warnings that the desperate would destroy him. But his father had been wrong about everything that mattered. The desperate weren't dangerous. They were human, capable of extraordinary love, remarkable resilience, and stunning generosity when given the smallest opportunity. After the announcement, Luca found Naomi and Maya outside by the Christmas tree that dominated the center's lobby. "You did it," Naomi said, tears streaming down her face. "You're really doing this. You're going to help so many families." "We're doing this," Luca corrected. "I want you on the board. I want your voice, your perspective, your experience. I need someone who's been there, someone who understands what it's really like." Naomi looked shocked. "Me? On a board? Luca, I don't have any experience with." "You have the only experience that matters," Luca interrupted. "You survived. You stayed good. You know exactly what families need because you needed it. You're perfect for this." Maya tugged on Luca's sleeve, now 8 years old, thriving, no longer the frightened child sleeping on frozen pavement. "Mr. Luca, does this mean more kids won't be cold on Christmas?" Luca knelt to her level. "Yes, sweetheart, lots of families. Because your mom reminded me what helping actually means." Maya smiled, then wrapped her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. "You're like family now, right, Mama?" Naomi wiped her eyes, nodding. "Right, baby. He's famiglia." Luca felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 3 decades. His father had taught him that trust was weakness, that kindness was naive, that compassion would get him killed. But Naomi had taught him something different, something true. That wealth without compassion is just numbers on a screen. That power without purpose is just noise. That the richest thing a person can own isn't money or territory or fear. It's the ability to look someone in the eyes and say, "I see you. You matter. I'll help you stand." As they walked through Chicago together that Christmas Eve, a mafia boss, a single mother, and a little girl clutching a worn doll named Grace, Luca realized he'd finally found what he'd been searching for his entire violent life. Not more money, not more power, not more control, just meaning, just purpose, just the knowledge that his existence made someone else's life better instead of worse. Naomi had given him that, had broken his heart wide open with kindness and survival and love that couldn't be extinguished even by 6 months of hell. And he would spend the rest of his life grateful that one freezing Christmas Eve, he'd stopped walking. That he'd looked poverty in the face and found humanity staring back. That he'd given a test that was really for himself, not for her. The test he'd designed for Naomi had actually been a test of whether he could still be human. Whether redemption was possible for men with blood on their hands. Whether his father's brutal philosophy was wisdom or just fear disguised as strength. He'd finally, miraculously, passed. Thank you for watching this Christmas story. If it moved you, subscribe for more stories about unexpected grace and second chances. Drop a comment telling me about a time someone's kindness changed your life. And remember, sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unlikely moments. Merry Christmas and see you on the next one.